Welcome to the Growing Green Ventures podcast, where we listen to stories from impact entrepreneurs from multiple different sectors and industries, learning the real steps it takes to create a business with lasting impact. Now, today I had the pleasure of speaking with David Cutler, the founder of Fortuna Cools and Nutshell Coolers, a business that's addressing plastic waste along the cold supply chain, upcycling coconut shells into insulative packaging for food, storage, and consumer goods. The business story originates in the Philippines, where David saw an opportunity to make a real difference and he took it. Now, within the Philippines, more than 300,000 styrofoam boxes move through the domestic seafood trade at any given time, and they mostly last up to 4 trips before being tossed into landfills and eventually getting washed out into the ocean, adding to the immense amount of plastic ocean-bound waste. Now, addressing the need for durable cooling systems, Fortuna Cools uses agricultural waste and upcycles coconut husks primarily, an abundant byproduct of the coconut oil industry, into insulation that is more durable and more insulative than traditional plastic foam alternatives. The coolers redirect agricultural waste out of landfill into a product that reduces the demand for styrofoam packaging, all while providing economic opportunity to small-scale farmers in the Philippines. This is a real win-win-win situation. You can imagine that this example and this supply chain could be replicated across the world in multiple different economies and countries, providing the same benefits. We speak about David's journey working in policy, going to grad school, and to launching his own business. How interconnected we all are in this global economy and the ups and downs of starting a business that spans multiple different countries from the get-go. Now, I'm super excited to speak with him today, and there's a lot that you guys can all learn from his story. So I thank you for your time and enjoy. David, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really excited to dive into this. Before we jump into our conversation, I'd love for you to give our audience a little bit of a background on who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your educational background.
Sure. So my name is David. I'm the co-founder and currently the CEO of Fortuna Cools. We are a biomaterials company that turns agricultural waste into insulation for packaging, for consumer gear, for construction. Anywhere where people use plastic foam today, they can be using natural agricultural fibers tomorrow. And this company came out of a graduate school project. We were students at Stanford's design school. We started a little 1-quarter project about 4.5 years ago. And that project became, a year-long project. It became an idea that we couldn't get out of our heads. And ultimately it became a business that is growing in a couple different countries and several different markets today. And it's been a really fun journey. My background was not necessarily in entrepreneurship. I studied policy and worked in international development several years ago, and went back to graduate school to learn a little bit more about the intersection between business and policy, business and the environment. And it was really through learning about those intersections and having a really amazing environment at the Stanford Design School in particular that sort of nurtured this entrepreneurial idea, but also, gave me the tools and importantly built the team and made all those connections that made this company possible.
Mm-hmm. That is a really unique intersection, and between, again, policy and design, policy and business, policy and sustainability, obviously super important. Let's go back a little bit further. And you went into work within this policy sector. What got you into that from the first place? What was that original motivation for that type of work?
Yeah, it was all about making change in the world. I worked as an intern a million years ago at the United Nations, and I worked for the U.S. State Department doing human rights work in the Middle East. I studied Arabic and have family in the Middle East and in a lot of different countries around the world. Traveled widely, and originally got interested in policy because I felt like it was the best way to make a really big and positive change in the world, and to really, make the changes that I thought needed to be made at scale. And that's kind of the exciting thing about policy is you can have a few conversations in some rooms of power or talk to the right people, And with the stroke of a pen, or with an enlightened sort of policy position, you can really change a lot of people's lives in very tangible and important ways. And of course,
Mhm.
the inverse is true too. And probably the inverse is what got me interested in the first place. I saw the effects of a lot of really awful policies and politics on my family in the Middle East, and then on the environment in the Middle East, and
Mhm.
in Latin America, in South Asia. And so I've sort of seen the inverse too. And the original thing that propelled me into human rights work, into international development, and into the policy around the environment and development was trying to fix some of the worst mistakes that I'd seen on the ground
Mhm.
in a lot of these countries.
Yeah. And so you're working with a lot of institutions, organizations, governments, and the like. Did you have a lot of exposure to the private sector before Fortuna Cools, of course?
Not so much, and that is, yeah, I think that becomes part of the story later on. But I was working way up the chain,
Mm.
at the far end of the telescope in a way. I was interacting with people that control, big budgets, and had very tangible effects on the private sector and on people's lives somewhere down the line. But
Mhm.
when you're living in Washington, D.C., for example, or you're, speaking at the Security Council in New York, you are very far away from the private sector,
Mhm.
and a lot of your words can seem a little bit abstract or disconnected from the organizations and people that are affected. Ultimately,
Mhm.
that's what got me interested in working more in the private sector, is making that connection much more directly,
Yeah.
and having a much clearer idea about the impacts of what I was doing, and what
Mhm.
the issues that I was working on, and
Mhm.
seeing how that interacts with people and with the world every day. I definitely got a little bit jaded, I guess you could say, or just a little bit um, unmotivated after spending several years in DC talking about these very lofty things, but actually spending very
Mhm.
little time, seeing the impacts firsthand on the ground and in the private sector.
No, absolutely. I think there's nothing that can replace the actual act of doing and executing on an idea instead of just um, ideating and big words and hoping that what you'll say will actually come into fruition. But so you're in this position, you're working in the UN, you're working with these policymakers and the like, and then you decide to go back to school, to graduate school, and you're in this design class, correct? Tell me about how this idea of Fortuna Cools comes up, of how you're upcycling agricultural waste into effectively a consumer goods or into an insulation product. Paint a picture of that moment in your history.
Yeah, sure. It does come sort of out of the blue. It's a bit of a zag after a sort of straight and narrow
Yeah.
policy path up to that point. But I went back to graduate school first and foremost to incubate and make real a lot of lofty ideas that had sort of been kicking around my head for several years. Working in DC on policy, and then actually before grad school, I was trying to do the exact opposite of that. So I moved to India, worked at the sort of intersection of business and policy, and got to see a lot of these problems, environmental problems, first and foremost, firsthand when I was living in Mumbai, and seeing how the environment was could benefit people, but was also really choking a lot of people's day-to-day lives, their livelihoods, even their health.
Mm,
And there's nothing like living in India to see these things at scale, to see what it does to individual people, but also sort of how all those problems, all these issues can stack on top of each other, and get really messy. And in graduate school, I found a wonderful home at the D School, as they call it at Stanford. It is just this very action oriented, pragmatic place. And it's all about experimentation and doing stuff instead of talking about stuff. And I found that to just be this really liberating, empowering set of tools in order to, really try things out and see what would happen with an idea if you put it into practice the next day or the next hour or 5 minutes from now.
Yeah.
And I love that kind of prototyping mindset, that kind of
Hmm.
rapid experimentation model. And this company really came about because it wasn't the first or second or third idea that we came up with. We were partnered with an organization in Southeast Asia that was working on cold chain issues. So we were
Sorry, just to pause right there. You were partnered with, or the school or the class was partnered with this or institution in the Philippines?
the class, which is called Design for Extreme Affordability,
Hmm.
um, organized the class into student teams, and each team was assigned a partner
Gotcha.
in a different country working on a different
Hmm.
issue. And so the idea of this class was to basically take the total experts on a given issue, who are obviously not these students, but are people who have lived, worked, lived, breathed a certain challenge or a certain issue for years and years, and partner them with a few students who have kind of a fresh set of eyes, a different toolkit, and uh, a very honest interest in learning and trying new solutions, and kind of throw those two ingredients together and see what happens at the
Hmm.
other end. And so, we were a student team from across Stanford's different graduate schools. There were four of us, and we were partnered with a community-based organization in the Philippines. And so it was a few students and a few NGOs and community members working together on this problem. And the problem in those early days was a problem of cold chains.
Hmm.
Small scale fishermen were having trouble bringing their fresh catch to market at a high quality and getting a good price for their fish, because it was so hard to keep the fish cold from the moment it was hooked to the moment it
Hmm.
was sold.
Hmm.
And that cold chain problem is an absolutely enormous one. But the best thing to ever happen to our business and to this big set of complicated interlocking factors and ideas was that we didn't start at 10,000 feet. We started with one fishing village in one island in one country, and about 100 fishermen who were really struggling with this problem. And we spent the first 3, 6, 12 months of the project, and then ultimately of the company, trying to solve this one very particular problem for a very specific group of people.
Hmm.
And that was, that really focused what we did. It allowed us to iterate really quickly, and it allowed us to get feedback incredibly fast and
Hmm.
incredibly tangibly.
Hmm.
And so that was in a way kind of the ultimate inverse from working on policy, where you don't know for years and years if your policy is any good or not, or is doing anything, or if it's being completely ignored. Every idea we had was immediately put out into fishing boats and uninsulated cargo vans, and fish
Yeah.
would literally arrive to market either spoiled or fresh. And we would take that information, go back to the drawing board
Hmm. Hmm.
the next day or that afternoon, and try something else.
So, David, how long again was this class?
Yeah, so the class itself was about 5 months,
Hmm.
and it didn't end there. The class was designed very intentionally to sort of support promising projects and bring them into the real world, not
Mm.
necessarily as businesses, but definitely as sustainable um, and tangible real world enterprises in one form or another. So some student projects are encouraged to hand off the solution to your partner organization. Some projects become NGOs or are incubated at third parties, and some are certainly become businesses themselves. And the way that the class is structured is that for students who are excited about what they're building, um, there's a further 12 months after the end of the class where the design school supports a select few teams financially and with all the other resources that Stanford can bring to bear
Hmm.
to kind of provide that missing link from student project into the real world. And we were one of the projects that was kind of incubated post grad school and pre incorporation in that manner. And it was it was the only way I can imagine bringing this very esoteric and kind of like nascent project and turning it into a real business and a real scalable enterprise was kind of
Hmm.
having effectively 18 months of support from Stanford's design school.
So you're in this class, you meet your partner, and you two are the ones that are going to take it out further. Um, Tell us about how you found and scaled effectively this upcycling of agricultural waste. How did that component come into your business? And tell me about some of those challenges working with organizations on the ground, farmers on the ground who are collecting the coconuts, manufacturing the coconut waste, X, Y, and Z. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, definitely. In this world of materials, it was really important for us to find a solution that was going to be affordable for people first and foremost. I think there are a lot of
Hmm.
interesting ideas and solutions in the literature that rely on kind of space age materials and advanced manufacturing solutions. And I'm really excited to see those come to market in the coming years. But for us, it was critical, given sort of where we were working and also the scale of the problem that we were seeing as we spent more time in Southeast Asia. It was critical to find a solution that was going to be massively scalable and affordable from day one. And that
Hmm.
is how we stumbled onto agricultural waste and specifically coconut husk fiber as a material. It
Hmm.
was because, first and foremost, that material was available at enormous volumes pretty much everywhere where we were looking to make an impact and looking to replace either plastic foam or replace even lower grade solutions, things like plastic bags and the like. And as I mentioned, it was not the first thing that we tried. It was, the ninth or 10th solution that we stumbled over. But what we loved about it was that this material was just so abundantly available, and there was already kind of built-in streams of raw material kind of waiting for us. And the reason for that
Hmm.
is because, you know, coconuts are harvested at enormous quantities as this sort of global commodity supply chain. And they're harvested for coconut oil primarily, coconut water secondarily. And that meant that there was this huge source of agricultural waste that was just piling up next to coconut mills and coconut processors. And there was absolutely nothing to do with it, and that made us really excited. Yeah, so this was definitely not the first solution that we tried. It was not the second or third. This was probably the 10th different material or different form factor that we experimented with, but we got really great results in those early days. It was performing really well, and I think it's not easy in retrospect to see why this material is such a good candidate for insulation. That's the exact job that it evolved to do on the palm tree, keeping the coconut meat cool and fresh in the hot tropical heat. And so nature had already done a lot of R&D on this particular fiber for us. But in the real world, we also had a lot of built in advantages because this was a waste stream at enormous volumes in the coconut oil and coconut water industries. This material was piling up at absolutely crazy scales in the back of all of these factories, just waiting to either be burned, discarded, or for someone like us to, please do something with it. And so, we had great physical characteristics on the one side, and we had this ready-made and scalable material supply chain on the other. And it wasn't hard to go from that to, to commercial scale production. There are obviously a lot of
Mhm.
missing pieces there, but what we loved in those early days was just seeing a straight line, not just to a high performance solution, but also to a product and a material that could compete on price and at volume with plastic foams.
Manufactured exclusively in the Philippines, correct?
So we do our manufacturing in the Philippines, and we have built
Mhm.
this really great ecosystem in a couple of different regions in the Philippines. That's because we were there, we had great relationships,
Mhm.
and it was very close to our initial users and customers as well. But I think one of the things that makes this so exciting is that coconuts are harvested around the world at huge quantities, and the in terms of the supply dynamics, things look very similar in Indonesia and Thailand. It's also a very similar story in places like Brazil and Mexico. And so
Mhm. Mhm.
the model that we've built in the Philippines today is inherently super applicable in a lot of different countries and markets around the world. And
Mhm.
we have a pretty efficient supply chain as well, because we don't have to start from scratch in each market that we go to. We partner with all these existing coconut processors, and whether it's outside of Fortaleza in Brazil, or on Java in Indonesia, there are just mountains of raw material waiting for us, and processing centers where we can kind of plug in our machinery without having to start from scratch building a giant factory
Mhm.
greenfield site ourselves. And so we do work in the Philippines today, but it's a very scalable story.
100%. And any place that has coconuts effectively would be a place that would have the same need for this type of cold chain solution. But of course, as you said, the variables are there, and that's what I love about your business, is that it really just hits on so many different components perfectly, right? Upcycling agricultural waste, giving jobs to local communities and developing economies, reducing plastic waste, right? And at the same time, and it's important to know that a lot of these countries that you're mentioning, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and the like, are also huge polluters of plastic waste into the oceans, right? For a myriad of different variables, there's a lot of plastic waste being created in the river streams and the like. That go directly into the rivers and the water and pollute the waters, and of course eventually the ocean. So it's really just hitting all the different components as well. The material, the finished goods that you make, the liner that is directly made from coconut husk, that is biodegradable at the end of life,
Yeah,
or
it's
compostable. What is this end of life solution? Yeah.
yeah, it's completely biodegradable. All the inputs
Mm.
are bio based, and it is biodegradable at the end of life. Right now, it's not backyard compostable, and that is a
Mm.
trade-off that we have made because we need the material to stand up to really heavy and repeated use. So it definitely does not biodegrade in 30 days in a home compost pile, but
Of course.
it can be or it is chopped up and decomposing in municipal organic waste streams. And because all the inputs are bio-based, it's a pretty straightforward end of life scenario.
Yeah. The so the Fortuna Cools insulative packages that are used by fishermen and markets in the Philippines, for example, there's no poly coatings or anything else that's added onto the actual fiberboard itself, or
Yeah, we have a few different
can you
products,
elaborate?
and it
Mm-hmm.
really depends on the use case. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, for small scale fishermen, like our very first customers, they rely on wet ice as their coolant, and
Mm-hmm.
so we need to make a solution that is completely waterproof, water impermeable. To do that, we actually use a bio-based liner that we don't make ourselves. We partner with
Mm-hmm.
cassava a cassava biopolymer company in the Philippines that creates that kind of thin film waterproof barrier. And their cassava bioplastic, you could call it, is certified as compostable already to the
Mm-hmm.
ASTM standards. but it is that kind of two-piece solution when there's going to be direct water contact and it needs to hold water for long periods of time. In other use cases, in kind of more ambient or gel pack coolant solutions, like we have vegetable traders that take broccoli from the farm to the farmer's market 2 days later. They don't use wet ice. They don't have any kind of standing water needs. And in fact, what they need is a little bit of airflow, but just a reduction in the huge spikes in temperatures, getting really hot, getting really cold, that kind of cycle. And for that, we don't use the liner. We just, or the waterproof film. We just use our fiber insulation liner inside of their crates. And that's just a one-piece solution. So we have a few different kind of products and ways that we wrap this thing up. And I think in the future, it'll be even more flexible because we'll be able to, or we are already selling our material as an input for a bunch of different applications for packaging companies or construction companies or consumer gear companies to use as a drop-in solution or drop-in alternative to plastic foams for their own different applications and customers. And we're just simply swapping out what they would buy as PU foam or EPS for coconut fiber insulation instead.
A lot of these really interesting materials, products that use bio-based materials, upcycling and whatnot. When you look into the details, you see, well, it's a poly-coated or X, Y, and Z, and it kind of defeats the end of purpose. Yes, it reduces the overall plastic use, but it's still, at the end of the life, it's still plastic pollution that is still creating. So I'm happy to hear that as well. You are this American based in the United States, and obviously you have experience working in developing economies and the like. But what was it like to sort of get that manufacturing up, of processing the waste stream into the fibers, into the boards that are then used in the insulation packaging in and of itself? Is this a material that has been created elsewhere, and so that those manufacturing machines, the equipment, and the like are readily available, or was that a huge learning curve that you guys had to overcome?
Yeah, so we leveraged some existing manufacturing capacity that we found locally in the Philippines. And honestly, the entire idea really came about because we had such creative local partners in those early days, folks who understood this material on a much deeper level than we did, and had some of the beginnings of the machinery that we needed to work with it. There have been some applications for this material in the past, specifically woven nets that stabilize hillside during construction to kind of keep the soil in place. And that industry is not a huge one, but it was kind of the beginnings of what we needed in terms of extracting the fiber and weaving that fiber, working with this kind of material stream. And in those early days, it was really by working carefully and closely with those kind of collaborators, those engineers, but also just very handy local folks who had been in and around this type of material for decades. That kind of gave us that early head start and allowed us to move really fast in those early days. At the same time, you asked about what it's like to be an American working in these places. One of the huge unfair advantages that we had was we could kind of marry that local expertise and infrastructure with a really global lens and a global network. And so we've found partners and collaborators from India, from materials labs in California. And it was by combining, a huge local indigenous knowledge base with some of these materials experts and high-tech machinery consultants and stuff that allowed us to create a scalable, high-performance material that still had that low cost and volume built in from day one. And there are some challenges that come along with working as a foreigner in different regions in countries where you're not You don't know everyone and everything from day one, but in the spirit of the design school and kind of the original project, looking at old problems with a new set of eyes, I think there was a lot of advantages that came with that as well. And we always try to be very humble with what we know, but use all the resources that we have in different and creative ways. And I think
Hmm.
that's worked out pretty well for us.
That's amazing. I mean, it seems like it has, but I can only imagine those still, even in the early days, and of course, as you scaled up to where you are now, there are challenges having this operating a startup, let's say, between different nations. And can you elaborate further on what some of those challenges have been for you guys? And at the same time, has there been any distinct benefits to working between two different nations? You're not creating this entire supply chain, this product line in the United States. You're dealing with two nations. There must be some benefit to that as well, independent to the fact that you're selling in that market.
Yeah, for sure. The challenges are, there's a lot of just kind of like boring but very problematic legal challenges and sort of infrastructure
Sure.
challenges. Um, and it's taken a lot of time and is, continues to be something that we have to tweak as we go.
Hmm.
You're just subject to a lot of regulations and you need to come up with kind of creative solutions for operating between countries and
Hmm.
across different legal regimes. So we incorporated our company in the United States. We've worked with partners in the Philippines, both on the kind of sales side, on a lot of licensing issues. So we have representatives in the Philippines, and we're in the process of incorporating a subsidiary organization in the Philippines. And even just coming up with that legal regime has taken, it's definitely taken like time and energy that could have been spent on the business. Like if we were running a tech
Hmm.
startup out of San Francisco, there are very clear and there's sort of a cookie cutter approach that you can take to building that business, and you can devote all of your time and energy to the business itself. Whereas if you're doing manufacturing, if you're working in Asia, um, you definitely have to devote a little bit of time and attention to some of these legal challenges and structures
Hmm.
and make sure that what you're building is going to be sustainable and scalable. That said, it's not an insurmountable problem, and countries and even local communities, in our experience, are so excited to have outside investment and to have new opportunities come into these places and kind of collaborate with local organizations and companies and governments. And I think that should not be underestimated. This has been a huge benefit to us, partnering with local organizations and local governments, and doors have just flown open for us, even in very early stages of the company, in a way that working again in the United States, we would just be one among a sea of companies, and we would, if we got any special treatment, it would be on the bad side. People would not want to trifle with a small materials upstart. But in the communities that we work with in the Philippines, we represent and now today we provide a totally different income stream. We're doing advanced manufacturing in agricultural communities that typically have nothing but farm work to offer kids and university graduates even. And so people are very aware of the opportunities that presents, and really go out of their way to roll out the red carpet at times and make our life as easy as possible. Direct subsidies, but also just partners in high places, partners at every um, city agency, municipal government that we could ask for. People are generally very, very accommodating, and
Hmm.
that has been I tell people all the time that if you're starting a company, and you don't need to just hire AI engineers, but you need, to be experimenting on the ground quickly and cost effectively as a startup. There's huge benefits to at least in the early stages, to working in a place like the Philippines that has absolutely brilliant people and a lot of the infrastructure that you need, but where experiments can just happen quickly and affordably in a way that might take 6 months of permits and millions of
Mm-hmm.
dollars to play out in the United States.
Yeah, completely. David, on that note, I think this is a great segue into the finance talk of your business and your entity. Tell me about how you're funding this business and how you got the initial funding to cover those operating costs and the initial R&D and the like.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, coming out of Stanford, we had a very soft landing into the real world. We got support from Stanford's design school, Stanford's business school in our early days, and that
Mm-hmm.
allowed us to finance a lot of the early R&D. It also supported our kind of living costs for the first 6 months of the company, and was really the key enabler that allowed us to kind of like experiment with this idea before we had any story to tell investors or even ourselves the conviction to kind of drop everything and turn this into a real business venture. So university funding was critical in those early days,
Mm-hmm.
and then we took a huge leap of faith. We spent almost a year working on this full time without paying ourselves.
Post graduation.
Yeah, yeah, post grad, and that is just sort of what it took. There's not necessarily um, pre-seed investors that are throwing money at people coming up with businesses or solutions in this space. There should
Mm-hmm.
be, because it's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity that has very few innovators working inside of it. But be that as
Mm-hmm.
it may, it definitely came with a lot of risk in those early days, and Tamara and I took a pretty big leap of faith that what we
Mm-hmm.
were incubating was going to turn into something impactful and big and important. So university funding, some creative personal finance, and being extremely thrifty in kind of the classic startup mode. And then, as I mentioned, living and working in Southeast Asia, where we could do things on a shoestring, both for ourselves and for the business, that would have just been so difficult if we were spending all of our time in San Francisco. After about 18 months of iteration and early trials, early sales, we got our first outside investment, and that allowed us to again continue to build the company, not necessarily pay ourselves, but at least had the
Sure.
early vestiges of funding.
Mm-hmm. So to be clear, you graduated, you're still working on this idea, you have funding from the university. And you were based in the Philippines, correct? Or you were based back and forth between the US and the Philippines?
We moved to the Philippines pretty fast after graduating,
Okay.
and that
Okay.
was to move fast and also to stretch
Mm-hmm.
Stanford
Of
dollars
course.
much further.
Yeah. That's a bold move, but obviously the right move to make given your business and the like. And when you talk about sales, to be clear, you're talking about sales within the Philippines.
That's exactly right.
Gotcha. So this first year, on a personal level, you've moved across the world. Were you living off of your own savings? Did you invest a lot of your own savings into this business? And then, of course, and I don't know how it works within the Philippines specifically, but a question that I always have to ask entrepreneurs is, what did you do with health insurance during this time of kind of technical unemployment, even though you're working on this business? Where were you at in that component of your life?
Yeah, on paper, it certainly looked like unemployment and required quite a bit of creativity to bridge those gaps. And frankly, took some fairly significant risk. It was in those days, it was really just putting one foot in front of the other. And,
Hmm.
we had a high level of conviction, and then we basically sprinted after the prize, and we didn't think too much about all these kind of like personal and lifestyle implications. I had to at a couple points, and then in retrospect, and even today, it's definitely a non-traditional path and definitely a risky one. Um,
Hmm.
I was the way that we financed our lives and our business, we drew quite a bit out of personal savings that I had built up, working before grad school, um,
Hmm.
and Tamara did the same. We weren't paying ourselves for almost 2 years anything, and then we started paying ourselves kind of a pittance after we got some, after we closed a little bit more investment. But in those early
Hmm.
days, all the investment went straight into the business,
Hmm.
and it was a combination of uh, using savings, sleeping on couches, and then having some great partners both in California, on the personal side, and in the Philippines. People who started as business colleagues but became friends, and then became huge parts of the early success of the business by providing a lot of in-kind support, a lot of
Hmm.
resources, housing, you name it. People were just so excited and gracious and resourceful in those early days. And health insurance in particular. I wish that I came from a country that, where I didn't have to think about that, but I don't.
Sure.
So, I was buying, pretty bare bones health insurance on the Obamacare exchanges in those days,
Gotcha.
um, and was realistically taking quite a big risk in doing so. It was, didn't have much of a safety net, to be completely transparent.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I mean, that is an unfortunate reality of our economy and our system here in the United States, but obviously a big variable that one has to deal with when you're making the decision to choose a non-traditional career path, let's say, and taking this risk.
I was just going to say, at the same time, I felt like it was an incredibly unique opportunity and time in my life to do that and to take that risk.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and even though it was a huge risk, there were, big picture. I had graduated from Stanford. I had a very resourceful family and friends network, and um, I we were working with people in the Philippines who, in some respects, were taking much bigger risks than we were, and
Mm.
didn't have quite the same level of fallback, backup plans and stuff like that. So it really felt like the time, I was in my late 20s, not married, no kids, and it was in some ways like the best time to take those risks. And I guess somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that if it all fell apart and went to pieces, I would be able to pick myself up, and hopefully, our partners would too. But it was I did come at it from a level of privilege at the same time.
Sure. That makes sense, and it's important to recognize that. But again, you took the right risks, and you're taking the right risks, and I think it's a great lesson that is being told by a lot of the people that we're interviewing here on this podcast, but of course across the world and on doing entrepreneurial ventures, is that there are these sacrifices and these risks that you need to be taking to make that thing happen, to make that idea come into fruition and sustain it over the long term. It's not just about creating a business; it's about managing and operating a business in the long term. And on that point, David, your business, right? So at this point, you guys are creating an insulation product and selling it successfully within the Philippines. You're living there, you're based there. Was the goal to eventually create a consumer good product for the Western market that has higher margins that you can scale further and grow the business financially a lot more? How did that component come out? How did the Nutshell brand come out of Fortuna Cools, and this sort of Philippine-specific insulation product business?
Yeah, it was again a sort of opportunistic thing that
Mm-hmm.
presented itself to us. That was kind of a classic COVID pivot in a way, but it was also kind of a business imperative when you're a materials company going after this enormous but fairly low margin market. The cold
Mm-hmm.
start problem is a really significant one. To compete with plastic foams, you really have to compete at scale, and getting
Mm-hmm.
from 0 to 1 million is not so easy. And what we found was that the material that we had been working with, that we had been testing and selling to fishermen and to vegetable traders for packaging in the Philippines, was actually applicable in a ton of different markets and a ton of different business cases in different places around the world. And the kind of key unlock for us was, we have this low margin, high volume prize waiting for us. But to get there, we need to sell a little bit of this material or product at a much higher cost in order to kind of get over those initial hurdles. Because when you're selling, a ton, a metric ton of material a month at, a 15% margin, but your entire product is you're selling them for $2 or $3 a piece, that number is not very big. If you do that at scale, that number becomes enormous. But
Mm-hmm.
in those early days, it's a fairly low payoff. And what we realized was that the consumer gear market offered the exact inverse opportunity. It's a fairly low volume compared to plastic
Mm-hmm.
insulation. It's a fairly low
Yeah.
volume market, but things like recreational coolers are sold at huge margins. And we decided that we would try to compete in this market in order to kind of bridge that gap in those early days, make a product that had high margins and that we could sell
Mm-hmm.
1,000 of or 5,000 of, and actually continue to sustain the business and grow the business, grow the supply chain on the one hand. But on the other hand, and this has been super important over the last couple of years, not even something that we necessarily anticipated making this pivot, but having customers around the world using our material and our products in a bunch of different ways and in some pretty extreme circumstances, taking it deep sea fishing in Florida, or taking it down the Rogue River for a 5-day rafting trip in Oregon. It gave us a huge amount of firsthand testimonials and
Mm-hmm.
performance examples that we could then turn around and show off to early customers and early backers as kind of a proof point for what this material is capable of. We have very persuasive testimonials from people who are using this product every day. And again, that is just, I think, such a great thing about the way that we've built this company and this material, is that
Mm-hmm.
we have real world and a diverse real world use cases from the first couple of years of the company. It's definitely not a science experiment at Stanford that we're trying to figure out how to commercialize over 5, 10, 15 years. It's like we are
Mm-hmm.
making products every month, putting it in a bunch of different people's hands in a bunch of different markets, and getting their feedback and continuing to improve the next month.
Mm-hmm.
And we have
Mm-hmm.
paying customers, and that has just been super helpful for both sides of the business, for both the packaging and the consumer brands as they grow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. When you think about solving for that price parity, or that just making sure that it's accessible to the consumers that you're trying to address, is it just a matter of economies of scale? Is it just a matter of scaling up the actual production so that you can get your unit cost down? Or are there other factors that come into play when it comes to getting your product into a point where it becomes almost a no-brainer to your target audience?
Yeah, that has been, I would say, the number one priority of our company from
Hmm.
day one is getting to that price parity and really starting
Hmm.
with a very affordable product. We launched this out of a class called Design for Extreme
Yeah.
Affordability, and I think that the green premium is it's challenging in some markets. For us, it's an impossibility. We can't sell alternative to plastic foam at two, three, four times the price of the status quo because they're
Hmm.
just it's just not a value proposition that makes sense to anyone. And I
Hmm.
think that reality needs to be baked into every single alternative to plastics that comes to market. It really doesn't matter if you have the most amazing performance characteristics in the world. If you can't compete on price, you're not going to get adoption. And if there's
Hmm.
not a very, like, if you don't start cost competitive, it's going to be nearly impossible to even find your first couple of users because
Mm.
the thresholds in this market are so binding and so low. Um, so how do we get to price parity? Well, obviously economies of scale are helpful, but I think it's imperative that we started with a waste stream because it means that our cost basis from day one
Mm.
is super low, and we only have a
Hmm.
little ways to go with economies of scale. We're not talking about bringing down the price by 70% in some 10-year scenario. We're talking about being within 15% the price of plastics from day one, and
Hmm.
having a road to being 10 to 15% cheaper in year five or year six.
Amazing.
And that's kind of the neighborhood that we are playing
Hmm.
in, and that's
Hmm.
really, like, I think that that's just critical if you're going to have hope to do something at scale in this market. And I think the reasons for that are really clear. If you think about it, plastic is subsidized by oil extraction, by
Hmm.
uh, oil refining, and plastics are just kind of the leftovers at the bottom of the barrel after all the higher value outputs have been taken out, and are directly subsidized by big oil in that way. And basically, we think that agricultural waste is just this perfect alternative with the same sort of structure. Like, our material is subsidized by coconut oil logistics, by production, and we
Hmm.
take in the waste material after all that investment has been put into it for
Hmm.
another purpose, and we start with our raw material at a nearly free price point so that we can compete directly with plastics from day one, and then get a little bit
Hmm.
cheaper as we go as well.
When you think about the future of Fortuna Cools and your business, and obviously maybe this isn't within Fortuna Cools, but this is within David's future, let's say. Do you Are you thinking about ways to upcycle agricultural waste streams into other consumer goods, or addressing other problems? Or when you think about your future, are you really thinking about focusing on addressing these cold chain issues that you've experienced? Or are you thinking really about how can we use coconut waste specifically in other variables and other things, right? You're using the coconut as the base of everything that Fortuna does. Where does the future look like for your business?
Yeah, I think we have a huge ways to go with coconuts and with our initial market. I
Hmm.
think, sometimes these markets are not so intuitive because, a lot of material questions are not top of mind for us as we go about our day-to-day lives. But, you're talking
Hmm.
about plastic foam, expanded polystyrene or styrofoam that's produced, over 10 million tons of it every year. And that alone is, many billion-dollar businesses can be built to just replace that one material. And it's a material that is going to be replaced, needs to be replaced. And whether by regulation or by consumer pressure, it will be supplanted by something in the next 10 to 15 years. And that alone is already a huge business. And we think that we have, a material that can touch a lot of different markets inside of that one material world. That being said, I think as a company, even more than coconuts, which is, I think a really exciting world to
Yeah.
think about. But even beyond, coconut husk waste, we really believe in agricultural waste as this
Mm-hmm.
untapped, incredibly valuable and incredibly scalable solution set to a lot of different material problems. And I think, if you think about the world of plastics, I mentioned EPS is made at 10 million tons a year. Plastics is something like 400 million tons of it are produced every single year. And
Mm-hmm.
again, this is just a completely unsustainable level. And when I say unsustainable, I mean both environmentally and legally. For a lot of reasons, this will not be the future. There will always be a world for plastics, but a huge percentage of that plastic production is going to be replaced and needs to be replaced by something biodegradable, something natural.
Mm-hmm.
And agricultural
Mm-hmm.
waste in all of its different facets, all of its different performance characteristics and cost and logistics characteristics is just this kind of like huge opportunity for people to bite off different chunks of and to build different
Mm-hmm.
models around. And I think the kind of model that we've built at Fortuna that I am so excited about is, partnering with existing ag producers and kind of leveraging all of their inbound logistics, all of their material supplies, and then just bolting on a little supplementary machinery on the back in order to
Mm-hmm.
turn their existing waste streams into useful materials to serve a very
Mm-hmm.
specific market and replace a very specific plastic. I think that model is just so scalable. It's so exciting, and the market and the impact is just almost unbelievably or like unfathomably big. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that is really where I'm excited about going. And I think Fortuna, by kind of creating this entire model in the Philippines to kind of show what's possible, I think Fortuna is in a really good position to continue doing that with different materials in different places in the future.
I couldn't agree more. That almost answers my next question, which is, what does success look like for you personally, and of course as an organization, in the next 5 and 10 years?
I would love for Fortuna to be kind of the default plug and play solution for a bunch of these different markets in 10 years. I think,
Mm-hmm.
in Southeast Asia, we're already becoming kind of the go-to resource for big ag when they're trying to figure out what to do with any given waste stream. And I really want that to be kind of our stock and trade in 10 years is
Mm.
kind of the go-to solution provider to turn uh, an ag waste stream into a valuable material on the back of it. And I think even in 5 years, in the more near future, I hope that this Fortuna coconut insulation, coconut fibers in general, become
Mm-hmm.
a completely normal, even in many cases, in many markets where we're active, just the default for companies looking at cold chain applications. Right now, we're processing, we have the capacity to process about 1,000 tons of fiber a year. And hopefully that number will be at least 10 to 20 times bigger in the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And that represents,
Mm-hmm.
a few factories, but truly thousands and thousands of tons of material that will be biodegradable and is biodegrading in markets all over Southeast Asia and hopefully in 5 years
Mm-hmm.
North America as well.
David, any last messages you want to leave the audience with?
Um, Yeah, I think it's such a fun time to work on sustainable materials. And as I was
Mm-hmm.
mentioning a minute ago, the opportunity in this space writ large is just so big.
Mm-hmm.
And relative to a lot of other sectors, I think it's been overlooked and underutilized for, up until today. And so I'd really encourage people, first of all, to think about their everyday material choices and to think about the people and the materials behind the things that they use every day. It's a very fun and pretty addicting activity to start looking at the materials, because it just makes you
Hmm.
question all sorts of things that you sort of see right through today. It's something that once you start doing, you can't stop doing. So first of all, just take a closer look at the materials. But second of all, if you're looking around for exciting growth industry to join, to be a part of, it doesn't have to be to start something. But if you're looking to join a kind of like industry that is growing, and is going to continue to grow, is kind of on this sort of wave that isn't going anywhere. I do think
Hmm.
bio-based sustainable materials is an exciting world, and I would, yeah, if people want to get in touch and learn more, I'm always happy to talk to people interested in this space. Also happy to kind of provide directions or references to other companies that are doing really fun work in this world. It's a collaborative space and it's a lot of fun these
Hmm.
days.
Indeed. Well, David, I appreciate you for all that you're doing. When I think about a successful business that ticks all the boxes in terms of addressing social problems, addressing environmental problems, creating a product that meets the demands of the market. It's not just a nice to have, right? You're really reaching in and solving a problem. Your business really does all that stuff. So I acknowledge you for that, and I appreciate you for the hard work that you're doing, because the world needs more people like you and more businesses like Fortuna in a nutshell. So thank you for your work, and most importantly, thank you for your time today with the Growing Green Ventures podcast. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Yusuf. Appreciate you too. Thanks for the
Awesome.
kind words.